Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Nanny Agnes Hazel was born on November 4th, 1905, in a small rural community called Blue Mountain, Alabama. This area would later become part of the larger city of Anniston. She was born into a large family. Her father was James F. Hazel, and her mother was Louisa Holder Hazel. Nanny had one brother and 4 sisters, so the house was always full of children. Nanny's father worked as a railroader when she was very young. He would be gone for long periods working on the trains. But around 1920, when Nanny was about 15 years old, he decided to give up that job and take over the family farm. This change was very hard on the children. James Hazel was not a kind man. He was controlling and abusive. Nanny and her mother both hated him, though they could not say so openly. James forced all of his children to work long, hard hours on the farm. There were animals to feed, crops to tend, and many other chores that took all day. Because of this farm work, James refused to let his children attend school regularly. Nanny went to school only rarely. This is why she never learned to read or write very well. Her academic performance was always poor because she was kept at home working instead of sitting in a classroom. When Nanny was just 7 years old, something happened that she said changed her life forever. Her family was taking a train to visit relatives in southern Alabama. The train was moving along when suddenly it stopped very quickly and without warning. Nanny was thrown forward from her seat. Her head hit a metal bar on the seat in front of her with a hard crack. She was dazed but seemed fine at first. However, for many years after that accident, Nanny suffered from terrible problems. She had severe headaches that would not go away. She would sometimes black out and lose consciousness without warning. She also fell into deep periods of depression. For the rest of her life, Nanny blamed this train accident for all of her mental instability and her strange behavior. Despite the hard work and her health problems, Nanny had one favorite hobby as a child. She loved to read her mother's romance magazines. These magazines were full of stories about love, handsome men, and happy marriages. Nanny would dream for hours about her own romantic future. She imagined finding a perfect husband who would love her and take her away from the farm. Her favorite part of these magazines was the Lonely Hearts column. This was a section where people could write letters looking for love. She read these letters over and over, dreaming of the day she would find love through such a column. Life at home was very strict. Nanny's father had strange rules for his daughters. He forbade them to wear makeup or attractive clothing. He believed that if they dressed plainly, men would leave them alone and they would not be bothered or molested. But his rule did not work. During her childhood, Nanny was raped multiple times by different men. When she tried to tell her father what had happened, he refused to believe her. He called her a liar and told her to be quiet. This made Nanny feel alone and unprotected. Her father also would not let his daughters go to dances or any other social events where they might meet young people their own age. They were trapped on the farm with no fun and no friends. When Nanny turned 16, she saw a chance to escape. She got a job at a linen factory. It was hard work, but it got her away from the farm for part of the day. At the factory, she met a boy named Charlie Braggs. He was her coworker. Charlie was the only son of a single mother. He had no father at home, just his mother who was very close to him. Nanny and Charlie began dating. For Nanny, this was the romance she had always dreamed about from her magazines. After only 4 months of knowing each other, they decided to get married. Nanny's father had to approve the marriage, and he did. He was probably happy to have one less daughter to feed and control. So in 1921, At the age of 16, Nanny became Nanny Braggs. But marriage was not the dream Nanny had expected. Right away, there was a problem. Charlie's mother insisted on continuing to live with her son after he got married. She moved into their new home with them. Nanny later wrote about this time. She said that her husband's mother took over her life completely. The older woman controlled everything in the house and would not let Nanny's own mother stay overnight for a visit. The mother-in-law would take strange spells where her behavior was odd, but she never saw anything wrong with what she did. In the first years of her marriage, Nanny had 4 daughters. The first was born in 1923, then another in 1925, and twins were born in 1927. Having 4 small children so quickly was very stressful. Nanny was young and had no help from her husband's mother, who only made things harder. To deal with the stress, Nanny started drinking alcohol. She had always smoked casually, but now her smoking became a heavy addiction. She could not go long without a cigarette. The marriage was not happy for either person. Charlie Braggs began to suspect that Nanny was being unfaithful to him. Nanny also suspected that Charlie was seeing other women. Both of them were right in their suspicions. Charlie would often disappear from home for days at a time. He would not tell Nanny where he was going or when he would be back. Nanny was left alone with the children and her difficult mother-in-law. In 1927, something terrible happened. The couple's 2 middle girls, the ones born in 1925, became very sick. They had symptoms that seemed like food poisoning. Soon after getting sick, both children died. The deaths were sudden and unexpected. Nanny was sad, but she did not make a big fuss about how they died. She accepted it and moved on. After the 2 girls died, Charlie Braggs made a decision. He took their oldest daughter, Melvina, who was about 4 years old, and he left. He fled from Nanny and did not take her with him. He left behind the newborn baby, Florine, with Nanny. Not long after Charlie left, his mother died. Nanny was now alone with just 1 baby to support. Nanny needed money to live. She got a job at a cotton mill to support herself and little Florine. She worked hard and tried to make a life for them. Then, in the summer of 1928, Charlie came back. He brought Melvina with him. But he did not come alone. He was accompanied by a divorcee, a woman who had left her husband, and this woman had her own child. Charlie and this woman were together. Charlie and Nanny soon got a divorce. The marriage was officially over. Nanny took her 2 girls, Melvina and Florine, and went back to live at her mother's home. She was only 23 years old, but she had already been married, had 4 children, lost 2 of them, and been abandoned by her husband. Charlie Braggs always told people that he left Nanny because he was frightened of her. He said there was something about her that scared him, but he never explained exactly what it was. Back at her mother's house, Nanny did not stay single for long. In 1929, she met a man named Robert Franklin Harrelson. They got married quickly. They lived in Jacksonville with Nanny's 2 daughters. After a few months of marriage, Nanny began to learn the truth about Robert. She discovered that he was an alcoholic who drank too much. She also found out that he had a criminal record for assault, meaning he had hurt someone before. This was not the perfect man from her romance magazines. But despite these problems, this marriage would last for 16 years. It was her longest marriage. During these years, Nanny's daughters grew up. Melvina, the oldest, became a young woman. In 1943, Melvina gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Robert Lee Haynes. 2 years later, around 1945, Melvina had another baby. This second baby died very soon after it was born. The death happened right after the birth. Melvina was exhausted from labor and still groggy from the ether they had given her for pain. She was not fully awake or aware, but through her fog, she thought she saw something strange. Her mother, Nanny, had come to visit her in the hospital. Melvina thought she saw Nanny stick a hat pin into the newborn baby's head. When Melvina felt more awake, she asked her husband and her sister about what she had seen. They told her that Nanny had come to them and told them the baby was dead. They also noticed that Nanny was holding a pin in her hand at that time. This seemed suspicious, but they were not sure what to think. The doctors at the hospital examined the baby. They could not find a clear reason for the death. They could not give a positive explanation for why the baby had died, so they ruled it as unknown causes. After the baby died, Melvina and her husband grew apart. Their relationship fell apart from the grief. Melvina started dating a soldier. Nanny did not like this soldier. She disapproved of him and told Melvina so. Melvina and her mother had a very nasty fight about it. After the fight, Melvina decided to leave. She went to visit her father, Charlie Braggs, to get away from her mother for a while. While Melvina was gone, she left her first son, little Robert Lee Haynes, in Nanny's care. The boy was about 2 years old. On July 7th, 1945, something happened to Robert. He was with his grandmother Nanny when he suddenly died. The death was mysterious. Doctors looked at the body and said the cause was asphyxia, which means he could not breathe. But they could not determine why he stopped breathing. They called it unknown causes. About 2 months after the boy died, Nanny collected some money. She had taken out a life insurance policy on her grandson Robert. The policy was for $500, and the insurance company paid her. Not long after this, in the same year of 1945, something happened between Nanny and her husband Robert Harrelson. Nanny claimed that Robert raped her. She said he forced himself on her against her will. The very next day after this happened, Nanny took action. She had access to rat poison. Rat poison in those days often contained arsenic, a deadly poison. She put some of this rat poison into a jar that belonged to her husband. Robert Harrelson kept a jar of corn whiskey, and he would drink from it regularly. Nanny put the poison in that jar. That evening, Robert drank from the jar. He died within hours. People thought it was just another health problem, and no one suspected Nanny. After Robert Harrelson died in 1945, Nanny was alone again. But she did not like being alone. She wanted a husband. She remembered the Lonely Hearts columns from her mother's magazines when she was a girl. She decided to try one of these columns for herself. She placed an advertisement or answered one, looking for a new man. Through one of these Lonely Hearts columns, Nanny met a man named Arlie Lanning. He lived in Lexington, North Carolina. Nanny traveled all the way there to meet him. They met in person for the first time, and just 3 days later, they got married. This was her third husband. The wedding happened very fast, with no time to really get to know each other. Once they were married, Nanny learned that Arlie Lanning was very much like her second husband. He was an alcoholic who drank too much. He also liked women too much and was a womanizer. He would look at other women and probably go with them. This made Nanny angry. But in this marriage, something was different. In her past marriages, her husbands had been the ones to disappear. Now it was Nanny who started to disappear. She would leave home for weeks or even months at a time. She would go away and not tell Arlie where she was going or when she would be back. But whenever Nanny was at home with Arlie, she acted like a perfect wife. She played the role of the doting housewife. She cooked for him, cleaned the house, and acted like she loved him very much. The people in the small town of Lexington saw this. They thought Nanny was a wonderful, caring wife. They had no idea what she was really like. Then Arlie Lanning got sick. He had symptoms that seemed like heart problems. Soon he died. The doctor said the cause was heart failure. The townspeople felt very sorry for Nanny. They came to Arlie's funeral and supported her. They thought she was a poor widow who had lost her beloved husband. They had no reason to suspect anything wrong. After Arlie died, something happened to his house. The house had belonged to Arlie, but when he died, it should have gone to his sister. That was what his will said. But before the sister could take possession of the house, it burned down. A fire destroyed it completely. There was an insurance policy on the house, and the insurance money went to Nanny. She took the money and put it in the bank quickly. She did not stay in North Carolina much longer. Before she left, though, one more thing happened. Arlie's mother, her mother-in-law, was still alive. She was an older woman who lived nearby. One night, while Nanny was still there, the mother-in-law died in her sleep. No one questioned why an old woman had died. They just accepted it. But later, Nanny would confess to killing her. After these deaths, Nanny left North Carolina. She went to visit one of her sisters, whose name was Dovey. Dovey was living at home, but she was very sick. She was bedridden, meaning she could not get out of bed. Nanny came to stay with her to help take care of her. Soon after Nanny arrived, Dovey got worse. Not long after that, Dovey died. Again, no one suspected Nanny. They thought Dovey was just sick and finally passed away. Now Nanny had money from Arlie's insurance and from the house fire. But she still wanted a husband. She joined another dating service. This one was called the Diamond Circle Club. Through this club, she met a man named Richard L. Morton. He lived in Jamestown, North Carolina, not far from where she had been. They started writing letters and then met in person. In 1952, they got married in Emporia, Kansas. They chose that location for the wedding, but they would live in North Carolina. Richard Morton was different from her other recent husbands. He was not an alcoholic. He did not have a drinking problem. But he had a different problem. He was adulterous. This meant he cheated on Nanny with other women. Nanny did not like this at all. She wanted a husband who would be faithful to her. In January 1953, Nanny's mother, Louisa, came to live with her and Richard. Louisa was getting older and needed care. Nanny agreed to take her in. But having her mother there did not stop Nanny from her plans. Soon after her mother arrived, Louisa got sick. She had symptoms that seemed like a stomach problem or flu. On January 30th, 1953, Louisa died. The family thought it was just old age and illness. They did not suspect poisoning. With her mother dead, Nanny turned her attention back to Richard. He continued to cheat on her. Nanny decided to do something about it. She got more rat poison, the same kind she had used before. She put the poison into Richard's food or drink. On May 19th, 1953, Richard Morton died. People thought he had a sudden illness. No one suspected his wife. After Richard died, Nanny collected more insurance money. She had taken out policies on both her mother and her husband. Now she had money again, and she was alone. She immediately started looking for another husband. She used another Lonely Hearts Club or dating service. Through this, she found Samuel Doss. He lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They began writing letters to each other. Samuel Doss was a very different kind of man. He was a minister in the Nazarene church. He was religious and serious. He had a sad past. Years earlier, his first wife and his children had been killed by a tornado in Carroll County, Arkansas. He had lost his entire family in that storm. Now he was alone and looking for companionship. Nanny and Samuel met in person. In June 1953, they got married. Nanny moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to live with him. Right away, there were problems. Samuel was a religious man who lived by strict rules. He did not like the romance novels and magazines that Nanny loved to read. He thought they were not proper. He told her to stop reading them. Nanny loved those magazines. They were her escape and her dream. She did not want to give them up. This caused conflict between them. Samuel also had a routine and a way of doing things. He was not the romantic husband Nanny had dreamed about. He was serious and strict. Nanny began to feel trapped and unhappy. She decided she wanted out of the marriage. But she did not want a divorce. She wanted something else. In September 1954, about 15 months after they got married, Samuel Doss got sick. He had symptoms that seemed like the flu. He was nauseous and had stomach pain. He went to the hospital. The doctors examined him. They thought he had a severe infection in his digestive tract. They treated him with medicine and kept him in the hospital for a while. On October 5th, 1954, Samuel was released from the hospital. He went home with Nanny. He seemed to be getting better. But Nanny was not happy about this. She had a plan, and Samuel getting better was ruining it. While Samuel was in the hospital, Nanny had done something. She had taken out 2 life insurance policies on him. She was the person who would get the money if he died. She wanted that money, and she did not want to wait. Just 1 week after Samuel came home from the hospital, on the evening of October 12th, 1954, Nanny acted. She prepared food or drink for Samuel and put a large amount of arsenic poison into it. Arsenic was the same poison she had used before, the kind found in rat poison. Samuel consumed the poison. Within a short time, he became violently ill. His symptoms were much worse than before. He was in terrible pain. Samuel Doss died that same night, October 12th, 1954. The death was sudden and extreme. It looked different from a normal illness. When Samuel died, his doctor was alerted. The doctor's name was Dr. B. H. McDaniels. He had treated Samuel in the hospital. He knew that Samuel had been getting better when he left the hospital. Now just 1 week later, he was dead. The doctor thought this was very strange. It did not make medical sense. Dr. McDaniels refused to sign the death certificate. He did not list a cause of death. Instead, he asked for an autopsy. An autopsy is when doctors open the body and examine the organs to find out why a person died. The authorities agreed to do this. They took Samuel's body and performed the autopsy. When the doctors examined Samuel's organs, they made a shocking discovery. Inside his body, they found a huge amount of arsenic. Arsenic is a poison. It does not belong in a human body. The amount they found was so large that it could only have been put there deliberately. Someone had poisoned Samuel Doss, and the only person who had been with him when he died was his wife, Nanny. The police were called immediately. They went to the house where Nanny was staying. On October 13th, 1954, just 1 day after Samuel died, the police arrested Nanny Doss. They took her to the police station for questioning. At first, Nanny denied everything. She said she had no idea how poison got into her husband. She acted surprised and sad. But the evidence was strong. The police kept asking questions. They told her about the autopsy results. They told her they knew it was poison. After hours of questioning, Nanny changed her story. She began to confess. But she did not just confess to killing Samuel Doss. Once she started talking, she could not stop. She told the police about all the other people she had killed over the years. She told them about her second husband, Robert Harrelson. She told them about her third husband, Arlie Lanning. She told them about her fourth husband, Richard Morton. She told them about her mother, Louisa. She told them about her sister, Dovey. She told them about her grandson, little Robert Lee Haynes. She told them about her mother-in-law, Arlie's mother. She told them about the 2 babies that had died, including the one born to Melvina. In total, she confessed to killing 11 people. The police were shocked by what they heard. They had only suspected her in 1 death, but now she was telling them about a long history of murder. Nanny explained how she had used rat poison, which contained arsenic, to kill most of her victims. She put it in food, in drink, in whiskey jars. She explained that she killed them because she was unhappy with them, or because she wanted insurance money, or just because she was tired of them. She did not seem sad or sorry as she talked. In fact, some people noticed that she smiled or even giggled while describing the deaths. This is why the newspapers would later call her the Giggling Granny. The police wrote down everything she said. They had to investigate each claim to see if it was true. But Nanny had given them a full confession. She had told them how she did it, why she did it, and who she did it to. The case against her was very strong. She was in custody, and she would not be going free again. After Nanny Doss confessed to the police in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on October 13th, 1954, the real work began. The police had a woman in custody who said she had killed 11 people over a period of nearly 30 years. But a confession alone was not enough. They needed to prove that what she said was true. They needed evidence. The first step was to look closely at the death of Samuel Doss. This was the only death that had led to an autopsy. The autopsy report was clear. Samuel's body contained a massive amount of arsenic. Arsenic is a poison that stays in the body even after death. The doctors had measured the amount, and it was far more than could ever happen by accident. This was proof that Samuel had been murdered. The police asked Nanny where she got the poison. She told them she had used rat poison. In those days, rat poison was easy to buy at any store. It contained arsenic, and people kept it in their homes to kill rats and mice. Nanny explained that she had simply put some of this poison into Samuel's food or drink. She did not need any special skills or tools. She just mixed it in, and he ate it. With Samuel's case proven by science, the police now had to look at the other 10 deaths Nanny had confessed to. These deaths had happened in different states over many years. Some had happened in Alabama, some in North Carolina, and some in other places. The police in Tulsa could not investigate all of these themselves. They had to contact police departments in other states and ask for their help. Detectives began to dig into old records. They looked at death certificates from the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. They talked to doctors who had signed those death certificates years ago. They interviewed family members who were still alive. They searched for any records of insurance policies that Nanny had collected money from. The investigation into the other deaths was difficult because so much time had passed. Bodies had been buried for many years. In some cases, the bodies had been moved or the graves were hard to find. In other cases, the people had been cremated, so there was no body left to examine. Without a body, it was much harder to prove poisoning. But Nanny's own words helped the investigators. She gave them many details about each death. She told them where she was living at the time. She told them what she had used to poison each person. For most of them, she said she used the same rat poison with arsenic. She told them about the insurance policies she had taken out on some of the victims. She told them about the house fire after Arlie Lanning died and how she got the insurance money from that too. One of the deaths that investigators looked at closely was the death of Nanny's grandson, Robert Lee Haynes, in 1945. The little boy had died while in Nanny's care. The death certificate said asphyxia from unknown causes. But Nanny now admitted that she had killed him. She did not give a clear reason why. She just said she did it. She also admitted that she had taken out a $500 life insurance policy on the boy and collected the money after he died. Another death they investigated was that of her second husband, Robert Harrelson, also in 1945. Nanny had told the police that he raped her and that she poisoned him the next day. She put the poison in his corn whiskey jar. Investigators found people who remembered Robert Harrelson. They remembered that he died suddenly, but no one suspected murder at the time. Now, with Nanny's confession, it made sense. The death of Arlie Lanning in North Carolina was also looked at again. The local doctor had signed the death certificate as heart failure, but Nanny said she poisoned him. The house fire after his death was also suspicious. Nanny had collected insurance money from that fire. Investigators in North Carolina talked to people who remembered Nanny. They remembered her as a woman who would disappear for months at a time. They remembered that she seemed nice at Arlie's funeral. Now they knew the truth. The death of Richard Morton in 1953 was another case. He had died suddenly, and Nanny had collected insurance money. His death happened not long after Nanny's mother, Louisa, had also died while living with them. Investigators looked at both deaths together. They found that Nanny had taken out insurance policies on both her mother and her husband. She collected money after both of them died within months of each other. The death of Nanny's sister Dovey was also examined. Dovey had been bedridden, and Nanny came to care for her. Soon after, Dovey died. There was no insurance policy on Dovey that investigators could find. Nanny said she killed her sister just because she wanted to. Maybe she was angry at her, or maybe she was just in the habit of killing by then. She did not give a clear reason. The deaths of the two babies were the hardest to investigate. One was the baby born to Melvina in the hospital around 1945. Melvina had thought she saw her mother stick a hat pin into the baby's head, but the hospital records were old, and the doctors who had treated the baby could not remember the case clearly. There was no body to examine. But Nanny's confession, combined with what Melvina had told people years earlier, made it seem very likely that Nanny had killed that baby too. The other baby death was from 1927, when Nanny's two middle daughters died of suspected food poisoning. These were her own children. She had been married to Charlie Braggs at the time. The girls got sick and died quickly. Nanny now admitted that she had poisoned them. She did not explain why. Maybe she was stressed from having 4 small children. Maybe she was angry at her husband. Whatever the reason, she confessed to killing her own little girls. As the investigation continued, the police also learned about Nanny's first husband, Charlie Braggs. He was still alive, and police found him and talked to him. Charlie told them that he had left Nanny back in 1927 because he was frightened of her. He said something about her scared him, though he could not explain exactly what. After their 2 daughters died, he decided to take the oldest child and run away. He left the newborn behind because he was afraid to take her. Charlie's story matched what Nanny had told police. It helped confirm that she had been acting strangely even back then. The state of Oklahoma had to decide how to handle the case. Nanny had confessed to 11 murders, but they happened in different states. Oklahoma only had clear jurisdiction over the murder of Samuel Doss, because that murder happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The other murders had happened in Alabama and North Carolina. Those states could choose to charge Nanny with those deaths if they wanted to. The prosecutor in Tulsa was a man named J. Howard Edmondson. He would later become the governor of Oklahoma. He studied the case carefully. He knew that trying Nanny for all 11 murders would be very difficult. Some of the cases were old, and the evidence was weak. But the case against her for killing Samuel Doss was very strong. There was an autopsy. There was scientific proof of arsenic. There was her confession. This was the case they could win easily. Edmondson decided that Oklahoma would only charge Nanny with the murder of Samuel Doss. The other states could decide later if they wanted to charge her. But in reality, once Nanny was in prison for life, other states might not bother to put her on trial. It would cost money and time, and she would already be locked up. Nanny Doss was held in jail while she waited for her trial. She did not seem worried. She talked to guards and other prisoners. She smiled often. Newspaper reporters came to write stories about her. They gave her nicknames like the Giggling Granny because she would sometimes laugh or smile when talking about the murders. She did not act like a woman who had killed 11 people, including her own children and grandchildren. On May 17, 1955, Nanny Doss appeared in court in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was formally charged with the murder of Samuel Doss. Her lawyer stood with her. The prosecutor, J. Howard Edmondson, was ready to present the case. But there was no need for a long trial. Nanny had decided what she was going to do. When the judge asked her how she pleaded to the charge of murder, Nanny spoke clearly. She said guilty. She did not try to deny it. She did not make excuses. She simply admitted that she had killed Samuel Doss. This plea of guilty meant there would be no trial. There would be no witnesses called. There would be no jury to decide if she was guilty. She had already decided that for herself. The judge had to decide what her punishment would be. In Oklahoma, murder could be punished by death. The state could have asked for the death penalty. But the prosecutor, J. Howard Edmondson, made a decision. He did not ask for the death penalty. The reason given was that Nanny was a woman. In those days, It was very rare for a woman to be executed in the United States. The state felt that life in prison was the right punishment for her. The judge agreed with this. He sentenced Nanny Doss to life in prison. Life in prison meant she would stay there until she died. She would never be free again. She was taken away from the courtroom and sent to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. This was a large prison in McAlester, Oklahoma. After the sentencing, Nanny was never charged with the other 10 murders she had confessed to. The states of Alabama and North Carolina looked at the cases. They saw that she was already in prison for life. They decided not to spend the time and money to put her on trial for the older murders. It would have been difficult to prove those cases so many years later, so they let the cases rest. Nanny would only serve time for killing Samuel Doss, even though she had killed so many others. Nanny Doss spent the next 10 years in prison. She lived in the women's section of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She had a cell and wore prison clothes. She ate prison food and followed prison rules. She was not a famous person inside the prison. She was just another inmate. During her time in prison, Nanny's health began to fail. She had always had health problems since her childhood. She still had headaches and other issues. In the early 1960s, doctors examined her and found something wrong with her blood. She was diagnosed with leukemia. Leukemia is a type of cancer that affects the blood and bone marrow. It is a serious disease that was often fatal in those days. Nanny was moved from her regular cell to the hospital ward inside the prison. The hospital ward was a place where sick prisoners could be cared for by doctors and nurses. She stayed there as her health got worse. The leukemia spread through her body and made her weak. There was no cure for it at that time. On June 2nd, 1965, Nanny Doss died in the prison hospital. She was 59 years old. The cause of death was leukemia. She had spent the last 10 years of her life in prison for the murder of Samuel Doss. She never faced justice for the other 10 people she had killed, but she died in prison anyway. After her death, Nanny's body was prepared for burial. She was buried at a cemetery called Oak Hill Memorial Park in McAlester, Oklahoma. This was the same town where the prison was located. Her grave has a headstone with her name on it. It does not say anything about what she did. It just marks the place where her body lies. The victims of Nanny Doss could not be brought back. Her 2 little daughters, who died in 1927, remained dead. Her grandson Robert Lee Haynes remained dead. Her second husband Robert Harrelson, her third husband Arlie Lanning, her fourth husband Richard Morton, and her fifth husband Samuel Doss all remained dead. Her mother Louisa, her sister Dovey, her mother-in-law, and the baby born to Melvina all remained dead. 11 people lost their lives because of one woman's actions. The family members who survived had to live with what happened. Melvina, Nanny's oldest daughter, had lost 2 children to her own mother. She had suspected something for years, but no one believed her until Nanny finally confessed. Florine, the other daughter, had to accept that her mother was a killer. The other relatives had to deal with the shame and the sadness of being connected to such a person. The story of Nanny Doss became known across the country. Newspapers wrote about her. Magazines published articles. People called her the giggling granny because of the way she smiled when talking about murder. She was compared to other famous female killers from history. But for the people who knew her personally, she was just Nanny, the woman who seemed so normal but was hiding such terrible secrets. In the end, Nanny Doss was caught because of one simple thing. She got impatient. She killed Samuel Doss too quickly after he came home from the hospital. If she had waited longer, the doctor might not have noticed anything strange. If she had used less poison, the death might have looked natural. But she rushed, and that rush led to an autopsy, and that autopsy led to her arrest, and that arrest led to her confession, and that confession revealed the truth about a lifetime of murder. The case was closed. Nanny Doss was dead and buried. The 11 people she killed could not be avenged, but at least the world knew what she had done. Her story ended not with a dramatic moment, but with a quiet death in a prison hospital, a final closed chapter in a long string of deaths she had caused. Story 2. A woman named Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in a small city in California called Redlands. Her father was Jesse James Gray, and her mother was Trudy Mae Gray. From the very beginning, Dorothea's life was not stable or safe. Both of her parents had a serious problem with alcohol. They were what people call alcoholics. This meant they drank too much, and it made them unable to take care of their children properly. Dorothea was one of 7 children in the family, so the house was often crowded and chaotic. Her father's behavior was especially frightening for the children. He would often talk about killing himself. Sometimes he would actually hold a gun to his own head in front of Dorothea and her siblings. This was a terrible thing for a child to see. This stressful and scary home life came to an end for her father in 1937. He died from a disease called tuberculosis, which affects the lungs. Dorothea was only 8 years old when she lost her father. After her husband died, Dorothea's mother, Trudy Mae, had to find a way to support her large family. She began working as a sex worker. Life did not get easier for the family. The very next year, in 1938, the authorities decided that Trudy Mae was not able to properly care for her children. They took Dorothea and her brothers and sisters away from her. The children were sent to live in an orphanage. This was a very difficult and sad time for Dorothea. To make things even worse, while she was living in the orphanage, a terrible thing happened to her. She was sexually abused by someone there. This kind of experience can deeply hurt a person and affect how they behave for the rest of their life. Dorothea did not stay in the orphanage forever. When she was 16 years old, in 1945, she got married for the first time. Her husband's name was Fred McFall. He was a soldier who had just come back from fighting in World War II. Young Dorothea probably hoped this marriage would give her a fresh start and a normal life. Over the next few years, she had 2 daughters. The first was born in 1946, and the second was born in 1948. But Dorothea was still very young and did not have a stable life. She made the difficult decision to send her first daughter to live with relatives in a city called Sacramento. She placed her second daughter for adoption, meaning other parents would raise her. She also had a miscarriage, which is when a pregnancy ends too early and the baby does not survive. Around the time her second daughter was born, Dorothea's life began to take a turn toward illegal activity. In the spring of 1948, she was arrested in a city called Riverside. She had been buying things like women's accessories using checks that were forged. This means she had copied or created fake checks that did not belong to her. She admitted she was guilty of 2 counts of forgery. As punishment, she had to spend 4 months in the county jail. After she got out, she was also ordered to be on probation for 3 years. This meant she had to follow strict rules and report to an officer. But just 6 months after her release, she broke the rules of her probation by leaving Riverside without permission. Later that same year, her first husband, Fred McFall, left her. In 1952, Dorothea married again. This time, she married a man named Axel Bren Johansen, who was a merchant seaman. That meant his job took him away on ships for long periods. When she married him, she did something that showed a pattern of lying. She did not use her real name. Instead, she created a completely fake identity for herself. She called herself Taya Singoalanayarda. She told people she was a Muslim woman who was part Egyptian and part Israeli. Their marriage was not happy. Because her husband was away so much, Dorothea would invite other men to their home. She also gambled and lost a lot of his money. In 1960, Dorothea got into trouble with the law again. She was running a business in Sacramento that was supposed to be a bookkeeping firm. but it was not a real business. She was using it as a front for a brothel, which is a place where people pay to have sex. She was found guilty of this crime and was sentenced to 90 days in the Sacramento County Jail. Her behavior was becoming more and more unstable. The next year, in 1961, her husband Axel had her sent to a state hospital for a short time. She had been drinking too much, lying constantly, acting in criminal ways, and even trying to hurt herself. The doctors at the hospital examined her and gave their professional opinion. They said she was a pathological liar, meaning she could not stop lying, and that she had an unstable personality. Dorothea and Axel Johansson finally got a divorce in 1966. Even though they were no longer married, she kept using his last name. She also continued her habit of creating new identities. She started calling herself Sharon Johansson. She began to present herself to the world as a very religious and kind person, a devout Christian. She started to build a reputation as a caring woman who helped people. She would offer young women a place to stay for free, especially if they were poor or had been abused. This made people in the community start to trust her. In 1968, Dorothea got married for the third time. Her new husband was a man named Roberto José Puente. But this marriage was also very short. After only 16 months, they separated. Dorothea claimed that Roberto had been abusing her. She tried to officially end the marriage, but Roberto fled to Mexico, which made the divorce take a long time. It was not until 1973 that the divorce was finally completed. Even after their relationship was over, Dorothea kept using the last name Puente. She would be known as Dorothea Puente for the rest of her life. Now living in Sacramento and using the name Puente, she began to focus on a new way to make money. She started running a boarding house. This is a large home where people can rent a room to live in. Her boarding house was located near the corner of 15th and F Streets in Sacramento. She worked hard to make herself look like a good person to the community. She would help people who had problems with alcohol by holding meetings for them. She helped homeless people and those with mental illness. She became very good at helping her tenants sign up to receive Social Security benefits from the government. She created a public image of a kind, older woman. She wore old-fashioned clothes and large glasses. She let her hair turn gray and did not dye it. She became a respected figure in the local Hispanic community, giving money to charities and scholarships. She even got married one more time, to a man named Pedro Angel Montalvo, but he left her just 1 week after the wedding. However, behind this kind image, Dorothea was still committing crimes. On December 21st, 1978, she was in court again. She was found guilty of illegally cashing 34 government checks that actually belonged to the people renting rooms in her house. For this, she was given 5 years of probation and was ordered to pay back $4,000. This was a serious crime, but she was not sent to prison. She was allowed to stay in her home, continuing to run her boarding house and build her reputation, while also continuing her pattern of taking money that was not hers. In early 1982, Dorothea Puente was living at her boarding house on F Street in Sacramento. She was supposed to be on probation for stealing checks from her tenants in 1978, but she did not stop her criminal behavior. On January 16, 1982, she went to a bar and met a 74-year-old man named Malcolm McKenzie. She acted friendly toward him and went back to his apartment with him. Later, Mackenzie reported that while he was with her, she put something into his drink without him knowing. The substance made him weak and unable to move or think clearly. While he was in this state, Dorothea stole many of his valuable possessions. She took a collection of old coins, some watches, and other jewelry. Among the jewelry was a diamond ring that had belonged to his mother. She even pulled this ring off his finger while he was helpless. This was a serious robbery, and it showed that she was willing to drug people to steal from them. A few months later, in April 1982, a 61-year-old woman named Ruth Monroe came to visit Dorothea at her home. Ruth was in good health when she arrived, but after being at the house, she became very sick. On April 25th, she told a friend that she felt so ill she thought she was going to die. Just 3 days later, on April 28th, she was found dead. Later, doctors would determine that she died because her breathing stopped. This was caused by a very large amount of a drug called codeine in her body. At the time, the death was recorded as being from an overdose, but the exact reason was not clear. It would be years before it was officially ruled a murder. Only a few weeks after Ruth Monroe died, Dorothea struck again. On May 16, 1982, she visited the home of a 49-year-old woman named Dorothy Osborne. As she had done with Malcolm Mackenzie, she prepared a drink for Dorothy. About 8 hours later, Dorothy noticed that many of her important items were missing. Her checks, her credit cards, and other personal things were gone. This time, the police caught Dorothea. She was convicted of 3 counts of grand theft for stealing from Dorothy Osborne. Because of this, and because she had broken the rules of her probation from 1978, she was sent to prison. A judge sentenced her to 5 years in state prison. She would also be on parole until March 21, 1986. Her federal parole from the 1978 case was extended as well, until 1990. While Dorothea was in prison, she began writing letters to a 77-year-old retired man named Everson Theodore Gilmouth. He lived in Oregon. She made him believe she was a kind woman who cared about him. In early September 1985, after Dorothea had served only half of her 5-year sentence, she was released from prison early. Mr. Gilmouth drove his truck, pulling a trailer, all the way to Sacramento to pick her up. A close friend of Dorothea's, a man named Ricardo Ordorica, who lived in the downstairs apartment at her F Street house, was also there to meet her. After she was back home, Dorothea continued her relationship with Mr. Gilmouth. In October 1985, she wrote a letter to his sister. In the letter, she said that she and Mr. Gilmouth were going to get married on November 2nd. Around this same time, Dorothea hired a handyman named Ismael Flores to do some remodeling work in her house. She asked him to build a large wooden box. The box was 6 feet long, 30 inches wide, and 30 inches deep. As payment for building the box, Dorothea gave him Mr. Gilmouth's truck and $800 in cash. The day after Mr. Flores finished the box, he noticed that it had been nailed shut. Dorothea then asked him to help her move the box. It was very heavy, weighing about 300 pounds. She wanted to move it to a storage place, but then she changed her mind. They drove about an hour outside of Sacramento and left the box near a river. On January 1st, 1986, a fisherman was walking along the Sacramento River. He saw the large, suspicious-looking box and called the authorities. When they opened it, they found a badly decomposed human body inside. The body was wrapped in several plastic bags and covered with a bed sheet. The sheet was held tightly with electrical tape. There were also mothballs and toilet deodorizer placed inside the box, probably to hide the smell. The body was in such bad condition that they could not identify it right away. It would be almost 3 years on December 28, 1988, before they could positively say it was Everson Gilmouth. After he was dead, Dorothea had sent fake letters and cards to his sister, pretending to be him so she would not worry. She also forged his signature on the papers for his truck and kept cashing his Social Security checks for many months after he was gone. While the police were still trying to figure out who was in the box, Dorothea continued her activities at the boarding house. In the fall of 1986, a 78-year-old woman named Betty Mae Palmer came to live there. Just a few weeks later, on October 14th, Dorothea went and got a California identification card. The card had her own picture on it, but it had Betty Palmer's name. 2 months after that, She changed the mailing address for Betty Palmer's Social Security checks to her own house. She then forged Betty's signature on the checks and cashed them herself. Over time, she stole nearly $7,000 that belonged to Betty Palmer. Around the same time, in October 1986, Dorothea went to the hospital to visit a 78-year-old woman named Leona Carpenter. Leona was in the hospital because she had taken too much of a sleeping pill called flurazepam. While Leona was sick in the hospital, Dorothea had a notary come to her room. She got Leona to sign papers giving Dorothea the power to handle all of her money and affairs. Just 10 days later, Dorothea started cashing Leona Carpenter's Social Security checks. In December, Leona was released from the hospital and went to live with Dorothea. But very soon, she got sick again and had to go back to the hospital. A few weeks after she was discharged from the hospital the second time, in February 1987, she simply disappeared. No one saw her alive again. In February 1987, a 62-year-old man named James Gallup moved into the boarding house. In July of that year, a doctor found a possibly cancerous tumor in his colon. James agreed to have more tests done. But then, Dorothea called the doctor's office. She told them that James had left Sacramento and gone to Los Angeles for a long time. He never got the tests. Like Leona Carpenter, James Gallup was never seen again. In July 1987, a 58-year-old man named Eugene Gamble was found dead. He had died from taking too much of a drug called amitriptyline, mixed with alcohol. It looked like a suicide. Dorothea was his landlady, and she told people that he had tried to kill himself before. Even though she was never charged with his death, police later wondered if he might have been another victim. In October 1987, more elderly people arrived at the F Street house. On October 2nd, a 61-year-old woman named Vera Faye Martin was sent to live with Dorothea by social services. Just a few days later, on October 5th, Dorothea began forging Vera's Social Security checks. Over the next few weeks, she stole more than $7,000 from Vera. On October 19th, it was Vera's daughter's birthday. Every year, Vera would call her daughter on this day. But that year, the call never came. Vera Faye Martin was gone. Later that same month, on October 21st, a 65-year-old woman named Dorothy Miller moved into an upstairs apartment in the house. Dorothea introduced her to her friend Ricardo Ordorica. By November, Mr. Ordorica had become the official person who was supposed to receive and manage Dorothy Miller's Social Security money. But within just a few weeks of moving in, Dorothy Miller disappeared. On November 20th, 1987, Dorothea hired a professional carpet cleaner to clean a room in her house. She told him to remove a large, foul-smelling slime that was on the floor. Even after Dorothy Miller was gone, Dorothea kept forging her signature and cashing her Social Security checks. She stole over $11,000 that belonged to Mrs. Miller. Around this time, a woman named Brenda Trujillo, who had been in jail with Dorothea years before, sent a letter to the Social Security office. She accused Dorothea of stealing $3,500 worth of her Social Security checks. Brenda had moved into the boarding house after getting out of jail. She claimed that Dorothea had drugged her and then called her parole officer. Because of this, Brenda's parole was revoked and she was sent back to jail, which meant she could not get her checks. In February 1988, a 51-year-old man named Alvaro Bert Montoya came to live at the house. In March, papers were filed to make Dorothea the official receiver of his Social Security benefits. At the end of August, one of Bert's roommates saw a man taking Bert's clothes out of his closet. Bert was last seen on August 24th. He missed an important appointment on August 29th. When people asked where he was, Dorothea told them he had gone to Mexico to visit his family. Social workers tried to contact him in September and October, but they could not. In November, Dorothea asked a man named Donald Anthony who was doing yard work for her, to do her a favor. She wanted him to call the social worker and pretend to be Bert's brother-in-law. He agreed. He called the social worker and said he had driven Bert from Sacramento to Utah. The social worker did not believe the story. She told Dorothea she was going to call the police. A few days later, the social worker got a letter, supposedly from the fake brother-in-law. It was wrapped in a paper towel, which seemed like an attempt to avoid leaving fingerprints. On March 9, 1988, a 55-year-old man named Benjamin Fink was sent by social services to live with Dorothea. His brother came to visit him every week for about 6 weeks. But by the end of April, Benjamin was gone. Another person living in the house noticed a terrible smell coming from Benjamin's room. Dorothea told him it was just a problem with the sewer. On April 29th, Dorothea had 12 bags of cement delivered to her house. In June, she had a hole dug in the yard, right next to the door of a metal shed. Soon after, the hole was filled in with concrete. By the fall of 1988, people were starting to ask questions. A former resident of the boarding house, John Sharp, spoke to the police on November 7th about Bert Montoya's disappearance. At first, Mr. Sharp told the police he had seen Bert a few days earlier, but then he secretly slipped a note to the officer. The note said, "She wants me to lie to you." Later, Mr. Sharp met with the police again and told them everything he knew. He told them about his fears and what he had seen at the house. This was the first real crack in Dorothea Puente's carefully built world. The police now had a reason to take a much closer look at 1426 F Street and the kind old woman who ran it. On November 11th, 1988, just 4 days after John Sharp first spoke to them, the police decided to take action. A detective went to Dorothea Puente's boarding house at 1426 F Street in Sacramento. He asked for her permission to look around the yard. He had noticed some areas where the ground looked like it had been dug up recently. Dorothea agreed to let him dig. She probably thought she could still talk her way out of trouble. The detective took a shovel and began to dig in one of the spots that looked fresh. He did not have to dig for long. After about 30 minutes, his shovel hit something soft. He stopped and looked closer. He had found a human body buried in the yard. It was the body of one of her victims. When the detective found the first body, everything changed. The police told Dorothea she had to come with them to the police station to talk. But Dorothea was clever. In the confusion and chaos that followed the discovery, she managed to slip away. She simply walked off and disappeared into the city. By the time the police realized she was gone, she had vanished. 2 days later, on November 13th, 1988, the police issued an all-points bulletin for her. This is an alert sent to every law enforcement agency in the state, and sometimes across the country, asking them to look for a specific person. Dorothea Puente was now a wanted woman. While the police searched for Dorothea, they continued to dig at the F Street house. What they found was horrifying. In the front yard, in the backyard, under a metal shed, under a concrete slab near some rose bushes, under a gazebo, they kept finding more bodies. Each shovelful of dirt revealed another piece of the terrible truth. The bodies were in different states of decay. Some were wrapped in plastic and bed sheets. Some had been covered with concrete. The police had to dig very carefully to make sure they found all the evidence. The boarding house, which had looked like a quiet, respectable home, was actually a graveyard. For 3 days, Dorothea managed to stay hidden. But then, on November 16th, 1988, she made a mistake. She was in Los Angeles, far from Sacramento. She was staying at a motel and using a fake name. She was calling herself Donna Johansson. That day, she went to a bar near the motel. At the bar, she met a man named Charles Wilkes. They talked, and she seemed like a normal woman to him. But the next morning, Charles Wilkes was watching television. He saw a news program on CBS. The program showed a picture of Dorothea Puente and explained that she was wanted for murder in Sacramento. Charles Wilkes realized immediately that the woman he had met in the bar the night before was the same person on the television. Charles Wilkes knew he had to do something. He contacted a man named Gene Silver, who worked for the CBS News program. Mr. Silver came to Charles Wilkes' apartment to talk to him. After hearing his story, Mr. Silver and Charles Wilkes called the local police in Los Angeles. They gave the police the name of the motel where Dorothea was staying. The police went to the motel right away. They found Dorothea in her room and arrested her without any trouble. She did not try to run or fight. The long search was over. The very next day, on November 17, 1988, Dorothea was flown back to Sacramento, escorted by police officers. She was booked into the county jail. She was formally charged with the murder of Alvaro Bert Montoya, the man whose disappearance had started the investigation. Now that Dorothea was in custody, the police and prosecutors had to build a case against her. They had 9 bodies, but they needed to prove who those people were and how they had died. They also had to look at everyone who might have helped her. One person they looked at was the handyman, Ismael Flores. He was the man who had built the wooden box for Dorothea that later held the body of Everson Gilmouth. However, on March 10, 1989, the criminal charges against Mr. Flores were dropped. The lawyers explained that too much time had passed since Mr. Gilmouth's body was found in 1986. The law said they had to bring charges within a certain number of years, and that time had run out. Later, Mr. Flores agreed to testify against Dorothea in court, and in return, he was given immunity, which meant he could not be charged for his part in the crime. On March 31, 1989, the prosecutors filed a new, more serious set of charges against Dorothea. They now charged her with 9 counts of first-degree murder. This was a very serious charge. Because there were multiple murders, the case qualified as a special circumstance case. In California, this meant that Dorothea could potentially face the death penalty. The prosecutors spent over a year preparing their evidence for a preliminary hearing. This is a hearing where a judge decides if there is enough evidence to send the case to a full trial. By May 24, 1990, the prosecutor had finished presenting his evidence. He had called 71 witnesses to the stand and had shown the judge 108 different pieces of evidence called exhibits. On June 19, 1990, the judge made his ruling. He said there was ample circumstantial evidence against Dorothea Puente. This meant that even though there might not be a witness who saw her commit the murders, all the little facts and clues pointed strongly to her guilt. He ordered that she stand trial. On July 31, 1990, Dorothea appeared in court and pleaded not guilty to all 9 murders. Getting a case this big and this old ready for trial took a very long time. There were many delays. Finally, on October 19, 1992, a judge made an important decision. He ruled that Dorothea would indeed face trial for all 9 murder counts. He also decided that the trial would be moved to Monterey County, California. This was done to make sure that a fair jury could be found, people who had not already made up their minds from all the news coverage in Sacramento. In December 1992 and January 1993, a jury was chosen. There were 12 main jurors, 8 men and 4 women. 6 alternate jurors, 5 women and 1 man, were also chosen in case any of the main jurors got sick or could not finish the trial. The trial of Dorothea Puente finally began on February 9, 1993. It was a very long and complex trial. Over the next several months, the jury heard from 156 different witnesses. The prosecutors showed them more than 3,100 pieces of evidence. The court reporter typed up over 22,000 pages of everything that was said in court. The jury had to listen to all the terrible details about how each victim had died. They heard from the toxicologists, the scientists who test for poisons in the body. These scientists explained that many of the victims had large amounts of drugs in their systems. They had drugs like flurazepam, amitriptyline, codeine, and others. These were strong medications that could make a person very sleepy, stop their breathing, or cause a fatal overdose. The jury also heard how Dorothea had forged the victims' signatures on their Social Security checks and cashed them for her own profit. After all the evidence was presented, the jury began to deliberate, which means they discussed the case privately to try to reach a verdict. They deliberated for 35 days, which is a very long time. The case was clearly difficult for them. On August 26, 1993, they announced their decision. The jury found Dorothea Puente guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. She was convicted of killing Benjamin Fink, Leona Carpenter, and Dorothy Miller. However, the jury was deadlocked on the other 6 murder charges. They could not agree on whether she was guilty of killing Ruth Monroe, Everson Gilmouth, Betty Palmer, James Gallup, Vera Martin, and Alvaro Montoya. They were split, with some jurors thinking she was guilty and others not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. Because she was convicted of first-degree murder, the trial then moved to a second phase called the penalty phase. In this phase, the jury had to decide what her punishment should be. The choice was either life in prison without the chance of ever getting out, or the death penalty. Once again, the jury could not agree. They were deadlocked on the punishment. Because they could not reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty, the law required that Dorothea be given the other punishment. On October 13, 1993, it was decided that Dorothea Puente would not be executed. On December 10, 1993, a judge formally sentenced her to spend the rest of her life in state prison, with no possibility of parole. This meant she would never be free again. She was sent to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California, a large prison for women. Even after she was in prison, the legal case was not completely over. Dorothea's lawyers appealed her conviction. They asked a higher court to look at the trial and see if any mistakes were made. On August 28, 1997, an appellate court in San Jose, California, agreed with the original conviction. They said the guilty verdicts were correct. However, they ordered a lower court to examine claims that some of the jurors had misbehaved during the trial. A judge held a special hearing for 3 days in September 1998 to look into these claims. On September 25, 1998, the judge rejected every single claim of juror misconduct. He said the jurors had done their job properly and the trial was fair. This was the final legal defeat for Dorothea. Her conviction was now fully upheld. Dorothea Puente remained in prison for many years. She was an old woman when she was sent away, and she grew older behind the walls of the prison. She continued to claim she was innocent, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. On March 27, 2011, Dorothea Puente died in the prison at Chowchilla. She was 82 years old. The cause of death was given as natural causes, meaning she died of old age or illness. She never admitted to the crimes, and she took the full truth of what happened inside the boarding house on F Street to her grave. The 9 people who were found buried in her yard, and possibly others, could not speak for themselves, but the investigation and the trial ensured that their stories were finally told, and that the woman responsible for their deaths would never harm anyone again. Story 3. Mary Beth Rowe was born on September 11, 1942, in a small town called Duanesburg, New York. Duanesburg was a quiet place, located about 10 miles west of the city of Schenectady. Her parents were Ruth and Alton Lewis Rowe. Her father, Alton, was a man who worked with his hands. When Mary Beth was very young, World War II was happening, and like many men at that time, Alton was sent overseas to fight. This meant he was gone for long periods during her early childhood. While her father was away, her mother, Ruth, had to work to support the family. Because both parents were often absent or busy, Mary Beth did not have a stable or settled home life in her first few years. Since her mother was working, there was no one at home to watch Mary Beth during the day. Because of this, she was often sent to stay with different relatives. She would live for a while with one aunt or uncle, and then be moved to another relative's home. This moving around meant she never felt like she had a permanent place to call her own. During one of these stays, an elderly relative said something to Mary Beth that hurt her deeply. This relative told her that she was an unwanted, accidental child. This meant the relative was saying that her parents had not planned to have her and did not really want her. For a young girl, hearing these words was very painful and stuck with her as she grew up. Eventually, her father Alton finished his time in the military and came home. He found a job working as a press operator at a large factory in the area. This factory was run by a company called General Electric, and it was the biggest place to work for people living near Schenectady and Duanesburg. With her father home, the family lived together, but it was not a happy home. Years later, when Mary Beth was an adult, she would tell people that her father was abusive to her when she was a child. During an interview with the police in 1986, she said that her father used to beat her. She also said that he would punish her by locking her inside a closet for long periods of time. However, Mary Beth's story about her father changed depending on who she was talking to. Later, when she was in court testifying under oath, she gave a different description of her father's behavior. In court, she said that her father did not have bad intentions when he disciplined her. She explained that her father had arthritis, which made his hands painful and weak. Because his hands hurt, she said, he could not use them to spank her properly. Instead, she told the court, he would hit her with a fly swatter. She also talked about being locked in her room. She said, "I guess he thought I deserved it." This meant she was telling the court that she believed her father's punishments were fair at the time. Mary Beth had a younger brother. As they grew up, she felt a strong jealousy toward him. She believed that her parents loved him more than they loved her. When her brother became a teenager, Mary Beth said something to him that showed how she felt. She told him directly, "You were the one they wanted, not me." This statement showed that she carried the pain from her childhood with her for many years. She truly believed that she was the less favored child and that her brother was the one their parents had planned for and desired. When it came to school, Mary Beth was not a standout student. She attended Duanesburg High School and did average work in her classes. She was not known for being especially smart or for having any particular talents. She was a quiet, normal student who simply went to class and did what she needed to do. In 1961, she graduated from high school. After graduating, she did not have a clear plan for her future. She did not go to college. Instead, she began working at different jobs that did not require special skills or training. These jobs did not pay very much money. For a while, she worked at a General Electric plant, possibly in the same place where her father worked. But she did not stay there long. Eventually, Mary Beth found a job that she would keep for a longer time. She became a nursing assistant at a hospital called Ellis Hospital, located in the nearby city of Schenectady, New York. This was about 10 miles from where she grew up in Duanesburg. Her job at the hospital involved helping the nurses take care of patients. She was around sick people and medical staff every day. This job gave her some basic knowledge about hospitals, illnesses, and how the medical system worked. She learned how patients were treated and what kinds of conditions they had. In 1963, when Mary Beth was 21 years old, her social life took a turn that would shape her entire future. A friend set her up on a blind date. A blind date is when two people who have never met before agree to go out together. The man she met on this date was named Joseph Tinning. Joseph was from the same area. The two of them got along well, and they continued to see each other after that first meeting. They dated for about 2 years. In 1965, Mary Beth Rowe and Joseph Tinning got married. They became husband and wife. After they married, Mary Beth took Joseph's last name and became known as Mary Beth Tinning. In the first years of their marriage, they started a family. Their first child, a daughter they named Barbara, was born in May of 1967. A few years later, in January of 1970, they had a second child, a son they named Joseph Jr. after his father. For a few years, the family grew in a normal way, with 2 young children in the house. But then, in October of 1971, something happened that affected Mary Beth emotionally. Her father, Alton Rowe, died suddenly of a heart attack. Despite her complicated feelings about him, his death was a major event in her life. He was gone, and she would never have the chance to resolve any of the issues from her childhood. Around this same time, Mary Beth's life at home with Joseph and the children was becoming difficult. The marriage was under a lot of stress. There were arguments and problems between her and her husband. In 1974, this stress led to a very serious event. Joseph Tinning ended up in the hospital, and he nearly died. The reason was that he had taken a large amount of a drug called barbiturates. Barbiturates are strong pills that can slow down a person's breathing and heart. If too many are taken, it can kill you. Joseph's case was so severe that doctors said it was almost fatal. He barely survived. Later, both Joseph and Mary Beth talked about what happened. They explained that Mary Beth was the one who had put the barbiturate pills into Joseph's drink. She had put them into his grape juice without him knowing. At the time, their marriage was in heavy turmoil, meaning there was a lot of conflict and unhappiness. Mary Beth later said she had gotten the pills from a friend. This friend had a daughter who suffered from epilepsy, a medical condition that causes seizures. The friend kept barbiturate pills at home to control the daughter's seizures. Mary Beth took some of these pills and used them to poison her husband's drink. When Joseph found out what she had done, he made a choice. He decided not to go to the police. He declined to press charges against his wife. This meant there were no legal consequences for Mary Beth's action. She had tried to kill her husband, and there was no punishment. This event would later be seen as a major warning sign, a red flag, that was ignored at the time. In the years that followed, Mary Beth continued to live her life as a wife and mother. She had more children, but the family's life was marked by a series of tragic events that no one could explain. Between 1971 and 1985, Mary Beth and Joseph would have 9 children. But only one of those children would live to be an adult. The rest all died, one after another, in ways that doctors could not fully understand. Mary Beth was always there when these deaths happened. She was the one who found the children unresponsive. She was the one who rushed them to the hospital, often too late. But for many years, no one suspected that she might be responsible for what was happening. They believed she was a grieving mother who had terrible luck. This is where her story stood as the deaths of her children began to mount, one after another, over the course of 14 years. Each death was explained away by doctors as a natural tragedy, a genetic problem, or a mysterious syndrome. But the pattern was building, even if no one was paying close attention yet. On December 26, 1971, Mary Beth Tinning gave birth to her 3rd child at St. Clair's Hospital in Schenectady. This was a baby girl, and they named her Jennifer. Right from the moment she was born, the doctors could see that something was very wrong with Jennifer. She was diagnosed with a serious condition called hemorrhagic meningitis. This meant there was bleeding and a severe infection around her brain. The doctors also found multiple brain abscesses, which are pockets of infection that had formed in her brain while she was still growing inside her mother's womb. Because these problems were so severe, Jennifer was not healthy enough to ever leave the hospital. She had to stay in the newborn intensive care unit, where doctors and nurses tried to keep her alive. But her condition was too serious. Jennifer lived for only 1 week. On January 3, 1972, she died in the hospital. The doctors told Mary Beth and Joseph that Jennifer's death was caused by the natural medical problems she was born with. There was no investigation. It was simply recorded as a tragic death of a very sick infant. The death of baby Jennifer was the first one, but it was not the last. In fact, it was only the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself many times over the next 14 years. The next death happened just a few weeks later. On January 20th, 1972, Mary Beth took her 2-year-old son, Joseph Jr., to the Ellis Hospital emergency room. She told the doctors that he had experienced a seizure and had choked on his own vomit. The doctors examined the little boy carefully. They ran tests and watched him closely, but they could not find anything wrong with him. He seemed perfectly healthy. Because Mary Beth was worried, the doctors decided to keep Joseph Jr. in the hospital for several days just to observe him and make sure he was safe. After a few days with no problems, the hospital staff decided he was fine. They released him and sent him home with his mother. Just a few hours after Joseph Jr. came home from the hospital, Mary Beth rushed him back to the same emergency room. This time, the boy was not breathing. He was unconscious. The doctors and nurses tried everything they could to save him. They worked on him for a long time, trying to restart his heart and get him to breathe. But it was too late. Joseph Jr. was dead on arrival, meaning he was already gone when he reached the hospital. The doctors had to determine a cause of death. They looked at his little body, but found no obvious injuries or diseases. They decided that his heart had simply stopped beating. They recorded the cause of death as cardiac arrest. No one asked why a healthy 2-year-old, who had just been checked by doctors and sent home, would suddenly die of cardiac arrest just hours later. No one connected this death to the death of his baby sister, Jennifer, which had happened only 17 days earlier. Less than 2 months went by. On March 1st, 1972, Mary Beth rushed her firstborn child, 5-year-old Barbara, to Ellis Hospital. Barbara was having convulsions. Her body was shaking uncontrollably. The doctors put her in the hospital and tried to stop the convulsions and figure out what was wrong. But Barbara's condition got worse. She slipped into a coma, which is a deep state of unconsciousness where a person cannot wake up. She stayed in that coma for several hours. On March 2nd, the day after she was admitted, Barbara died. The doctors needed to explain why a 5-year-old girl would suddenly have convulsions and die. They decided that she had a condition called Reye syndrome. Reye syndrome is a rare and serious illness that causes swelling in the liver and brain. It can happen in children who are recovering from a virus, especially if they take aspirin. The doctors accepted this as the cause. Barbara's death was recorded as natural, caused by Reye syndrome. Now, 3 of Mary Beth's children had died in a span of just 2 months. After these deaths, there was a pause. Mary Beth and Joseph tried to have more children. On November 22nd, 1973, Mary Beth gave birth to a son they named Timothy. This baby was healthy when he was born. He went home from the hospital with his parents like a normal newborn. But he did not stay alive for long. On December 10th, 1973, when Timothy was only 18 days old, Mary Beth brought him back to the hospital. He was already dead. She told the doctors that she had found him lifeless in his crib. She said she had checked on him, and he was not breathing. The doctors examined the tiny body. They found no signs of injury or illness that they could detect. They decided that the cause of death was something called sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. SIDS is a term used when a baby under 1-year-old dies suddenly, and doctors cannot find a reason after a full investigation. It is sometimes called crib death. The doctors told Mary Beth that SIDS was a known but poorly understood phenomenon. They offered their sympathy. They did not suspect that anything was wrong with the mother. Timothy's death was recorded as SIDS. Mary Beth became pregnant again. On March 12, 1975, she gave birth to another son. They named him Nathan. Nathan was healthy at birth. He came home and seemed to be a normal, growing baby. He lived through the spring and summer. In the autumn of 1975, when Nathan was about 6 or 7 months old, Mary Beth took him for a drive in the family car. While they were out together, something happened. Mary Beth later told people that she was driving along, and when she looked over at Nathan, he was not breathing. He had died right there in the car seat next to her. She rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. Nathan was dead. The doctors examined him and could not find a specific medical reason for his death. Because he was an infant and had died suddenly with no clear cause, they once again used the term SIDS. This was the 4th time a tinning child had died, and the 3rd time the cause was listed as SIDS, or a related unexplained sudden death. After Nathan died, Mary Beth and Joseph decided to adopt a child. They thought that perhaps there was a genetic problem in their family that was causing their babies to die. They believed that if they adopted a child who was not related to them by blood, that child would be safe and would not die. In August of 1978, they adopted a newborn baby boy. They named him Michael. Michael was not biologically related to either Mary Beth or Joseph. He came into their home as a healthy infant, and they hoped he would be the child who finally lived. Just 2 months after they adopted Michael, Mary Beth discovered she was pregnant again. On October 29, 1978, she gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Mary Frances. Now the family had 2 infants at home: adopted Michael, who was about 2 months old, and newborn Mary Frances. In January of 1979, when Mary Frances was about 3 months old, Mary Beth rushed her to the emergency room. The hospital was actually located directly across the street from the apartment where the Tinnings were living at the time. Mary Beth told the staff that the baby was having a seizure. The doctors and nurses worked on Mary Frances and were able to revive her. They got her breathing again and her heart beating. They reported that she had experienced something they called aborted SIDS. This meant that they believed she had started to die from SIDS, but they had caught it in time and saved her. They sent Mary Frances home with Mary Beth. A month later, in February of 1979, Mary Beth brought Mary Frances back to the same hospital. This time, the baby was in full cardiac arrest. Her heart had completely stopped beating. The medical team worked frantically, and they were able to get her heart started again. But the damage had already been done. Because her brain had gone without oxygen for too long while her heart was stopped, she had suffered irreversible brain damage. She was alive, but her brain was not working properly anymore. She could not breathe on her own. The doctors put her on life support machines to keep her body alive. They watched her for 2 days, hoping her brain might recover. But it did not. After 2 days, the doctors and Mary Beth and Joseph made the decision to take Mary Frances off life support. She died shortly after the machines were turned off. In the fall of 1979, just a few months after Mary Frances died, Mary Beth gave birth to another son. They named him Jonathan. Jonathan was born in October or November of 1979. He seemed healthy at first, but in early 1980, when Jonathan was a few months old, something went wrong. Mary Beth brought him to the hospital, and he was in very bad condition. The doctors worked on him, but he did not get better. He was transferred to a hospital in Albany, a larger city with more advanced medical care. Jonathan was put on life support. The machines kept him alive for 4 weeks. The doctors did everything they could to figure out what was wrong and to fix it. But nothing worked. In March of 1980, after a full month of being kept alive by machines, Jonathan died. The doctors could not give a clear cause for his death. Another Tinning child was gone. Now there was Michael, the adopted boy. Michael was the only child left in the Tinning household. He had been adopted in 1978 and was now about 2.5 years old. For a while, he seemed to be doing well. But in February of 1981, something happened. Michael fell down a set of stairs in the family home. He hit his head and suffered a concussion. A concussion is a brain injury that can cause headaches, confusion, and other problems. Mary Beth took him to the doctor, and he was treated for the injury. He seemed to recover. On March 2nd, 1981, Mary Beth took Michael to the doctor again. She told the doctor that she could not wake him up. She said he was just lying in his bed and would not respond to her. But when she arrived at the doctor's office with Michael, the doctor could see immediately that the boy was already dead. He had died sometime before she brought him in. Because Michael was adopted and not related to Mary Beth by blood, his death was very important. All the previous deaths had been explained away by doctors as possibly genetic. They thought maybe Mary Beth and Joseph carried bad genes that caused their children to be born with hidden problems that killed them. But Michael was not related to them. If the problem was genetic, Michael should have been safe. But he died anyway. This meant that the deaths could not be caused by genetics. Something else was happening. But even with this new information, no one in authority opened an investigation. No police officer came to ask questions. No one looked closely at Mary Beth. The doctors simply recorded Michael's death and moved on. They did not know what else to do. After Michael died, Mary Beth and Joseph had no children left in their home. All 8 of the children who had come into their lives since 1967 were now dead. Mary Beth was a mother with no children to raise. For years went by. Then, on August 22nd, 1985, Mary Beth gave birth to another baby girl. They named her Tammy Lynn. This was the 9th child Mary Beth had given birth to or adopted. Tammy Lynn was a healthy baby. She had no medical problems at birth. She went home from the hospital with her parents. For 4 months, she lived and grew like a normal infant. On December 20th, 1985, Mary Beth was at home with 4-month-old Tammy Lynn. At some point during that day, Tammy Lynn stopped breathing. Mary Beth later said she found the baby not breathing in her crib. She called for help, and Tammy Lynn was rushed to the hospital. But it was too late. The baby was pronounced dead at the hospital. On that same day, something different happened. In the past, when a tinning child died, the hospital simply recorded the death and the family went home to grieve. But this time, because so many children from the same family had died, someone finally noticed. A person from Schenectady County's Department of Social Services, a woman named Betsy Mannix, decided to get involved. She also contacted the police. A police officer named Bob Imfeld from the Schenectady Police Department came with her. They went to the tinning home on the very day that Tammy Lynn died. They wanted to ask questions. They wanted to understand why 9 children from one family had died, and why this one had died that day. They did not arrest anyone yet. They did not accuse anyone of a crime. They simply came to the house to start asking questions. This visit was the first step in a process that would finally lead to the truth. It was the first time that anyone in authority had looked at the tinning family and decided that the pattern of deaths needed to be examined more closely. On December 20th, 1985, the same day that 4-month-old Tammy Lynn Tinning died, something finally happened that had not happened before. Betsy Mannix from the Schenectady County Department of Social Services and Bob Imfeld from the Schenectady Police Department went to the tinning home. They were there because they had noticed the pattern. 9 children from the same family had died over 14 years. This was not normal. They wanted to ask questions and see what was going on. They did not arrest anyone that day. They simply talked to Mary Beth and Joseph and began to gather information. After this initial visit, the police decided that they needed to look deeper into Tammy Lynn's death. They could not just accept another unexplained infant death from this family. They decided to do a full investigation. The first step was to have an autopsy performed on Tammy Lynn's body. An autopsy is a medical examination of a dead body to find out exactly how the person died. The police wanted a specialist to look at Tammy Lynn. They brought in Dr. Michael M. Baden. He He was a very experienced forensic pathologist, and he worked with a special unit of the New York State Police. Dr. Baden was known for being able to find clues that other doctors might miss. Dr. Baden examined Tammy Lynn's body very carefully. He looked at her organs, her tissues, and ran many tests. After his examination, he came to a clear conclusion. He determined that Tammy Lynn did not die from natural causes. She did not die from SIDS or any disease. Dr. Baden determined that Tammy Lynn's death was caused by asphyxia. Asphyxia means that she was smothered. Someone had blocked her nose and mouth, so she could not breathe. She was killed by being suffocated, likely with a soft object like a pillow or a blanket. This was not an accident. This was a homicide, which means a killing done by another person. With this medical evidence, the police now had a reason to treat Tammy Lynn's death as a crime. They needed to talk to Mary Beth and Joseph more seriously. They decided to bring both of them to the Schenectady Police Department for formal questioning. They were taken separately, so they could not talk to each other about what was being asked. The police wanted to hear their stories and see if anything they said did not match up. When Mary Beth arrived at the police station, she was questioned by investigators. They asked her about Tammy Lynn's death. They also asked her about all the other children who had died over the years. The questioning went on for some time. During this interrogation, something very important happened. Mary Beth agreed to sign a document. In this document, she confessed to killing 3 of her children. She wrote or agreed to a statement saying that she had murdered Tammy Lynn. She also confessed to killing Timothy, the baby who died in 1973, and Nathan, the baby who died in 1975. She signed her name to this confession. After she signed it, the police arrested her. They officially charged her with the murder of Tammy Lynn. Even though she had confessed to killing Timothy and Nathan as well, the police decided to focus on Tammy Lynn first because they had the strongest medical evidence for that case. After Mary Beth was arrested, she was allowed to pay bail. Bail is money that a person pays to be released from jail while they wait for their trial. The court set Mary Beth's bail at $100,000. She paid this amount and was released from custody. She went home to wait for her trial date. She was not free forever, but she was free until the court was ready to begin. While Mary Beth was out on bail, the police and prosecutors continued to work on the case. They looked back at the deaths of all the other Tinning children. Even though many years had passed, they decided to exhume 6 of the children's bodies. To exhume means to dig up a body that has already been buried. They did this so new autopsies could be performed using modern techniques. They wanted to see if the other children had also been smothered. The doctors examined these bodies carefully. However, because so much time had passed and the bodies had decomposed, they could not find clear signs of abuse or smothering. The evidence was not there anymore. This meant that Mary Beth could only be tried for Tammy Lynn's murder, even though she had confessed to killing Timothy and Nathan as well. Mary Beth's murder trial began on June 22, 1987, in Schenectady County Court. The courtroom was full of people who wanted to see what would happen. The prosecution, which means the lawyers trying to prove Mary Beth was guilty, presented their case first. They called many witnesses to testify. One of the first witnesses was Dr. Bradley Ford. He was the pediatrician who had taken care of Tammy Lynn. Dr. Ford told the court about a conversation he had with Mary Beth shortly after Tammy Lynn was born. He said that because so many of her other children had died, he strongly suggested that she install a special alarm device for the baby. This device would monitor the baby's breathing and heart rate. If the baby stopped breathing, an alarm would sound and wake the parents up so they could help the baby. Dr. Ford testified that Mary Beth dismissed his suggestion. She told him she did not want to use the monitor. The prosecution used this testimony to show that Mary Beth did not want to take steps that might have kept Tammy Lynn alive. The prosecution also called 2 other important medical witnesses. One was Dr. Marie Valdez de Pina, who worked with the SIDS Foundation. She was an expert on infant deaths. The other was Dr. Thomas Oram, who was the Schenectady County Medical Examiner. Both of these doctors had reviewed the evidence from Tammy Lynn's autopsy. They both testified that they had reached the same conclusion as Dr. Baden. They said that Tammy Lynn did not die from SIDS or any natural cause. They said she was smothered to death with a soft object. This medical testimony was very powerful. It gave the jury a clear reason to believe that a crime had been committed. The trial lasted for 6 weeks. Many people testified, including Joseph Tinning. Joseph took the stand and spoke about his wife. During his testimony, he told the jury about a conversation he had with Mary Beth right after she was questioned by the police. He said they had a short talk, only about 5 minutes long. During that talk, Mary Beth said something to him that he would never forget. He testified that she told him, "I killed Tammy." This was important because it matched the confession she had already signed. After all the witnesses had spoken and both sides had presented their arguments, the jury had to make a decision. There were 7 men and 5 women on the jury. They went into a private room to discuss the case and decide if Mary Beth was guilty or not guilty. They talked for a long time. In total, they spent 23 hours over 3 days discussing the evidence. During their discussions, they asked the judge to have certain parts of Joseph's testimony read back to them. They wanted to hear his words about Mary Beth's confession again, to make sure they remembered them correctly. Finally, on July 13, 1987, the jury came back into the courtroom with their verdict. The court clerk asked them to announce their decision. The jury found Mary Beth Tinning guilty of 1 count of second-degree murder. However, there was a detail to the verdict. The prosecution had charged her with 2 different versions of murder. One version was that she deliberately caused the infant's death, meaning she planned it. The jury found her not guilty of that version. The other version was that she caused the death by depraved indifference to human life. This means she acted in a way that showed she did not care if the baby lived or died. The jury found her guilty of this version. When the verdict was announced, Mary Beth put her hands over her eyes and cried quietly. She was shaking with sobs. Her husband Joseph sat in the courtroom and later told reporters, "I still think she's innocent." After the verdict, the judge, Clifford Harrigan, made a decision about Mary Beth's bail. Since she was now convicted of murder, she was no longer allowed to go free while waiting for her sentencing. The judge vacated her bail, which means he canceled it. She was taken from the courtroom and held in the Schenectady County Jail. She would stay there until the judge decided what her punishment would be. A few weeks later, Mary Beth returned to court for her sentencing. The judge had to decide how many years she would spend in prison. The maximum penalty for her crime was 25 years to life. This means she would have to serve at least 25 years before she could even ask to be released on parole. The judge decided to give her a sentence of 20 years to life in prison. This was 5 years less than the maximum. He then ordered that she be sent to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women. This was a state prison in New York where she would serve her time. After she was in prison, Mary Beth's lawyers filed an appeal. An appeal is a request to a higher court to review the case and see if any mistakes were made. Her lawyers argued 2 main points. First, they said that her confession should not have been allowed at the trial because it was not given voluntarily. They claimed that the police had threatened her and that she had asked for a lawyer many times but was not given one. Second, they argued that there was not enough evidence to convict her. They said the medical testimony was not strong enough to prove she had committed a crime. In 1988, the New York State Supreme Court's Appellate Division looked at her appeal. They rejected it. They said the conviction was proper and would stand. Mary Beth would stay in prison. For the next 31 years, Mary Beth Tinning remained at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. She became a prisoner who was known as a model inmate. People who worked with her in prison, including volunteers and teachers, described her as a loving, generous, and caring person. She did not cause trouble. She followed the rules. But every few years, she had the opportunity to go before a parole board and ask to be released early. Her first parole hearing was in March 2007, after she had served about 20 years. At this hearing, the board members asked her about the crime. They wanted to hear her take responsibility and show that she was sorry. Mary Beth spoke to them. She said, "I have to be honest, and the only thing that I can tell you is that I know that my daughter is dead. I live with it every day. I have no recollection, and I can't believe that I harmed her. I can't say any more than that." The parole board listened to her words. They decided that she was not showing enough understanding of what she had done. They denied her parole and said she had to stay in prison. Her second parole hearing was in January 2009. This time, she tried a different approach. She told the board, "I was going through bad times when she killed her daughter." She was trying to explain her state of mind at the time, but the board members were not convinced. They said in their decision that her remorse was superficial at best. This means they thought she was just saying words without really feeling sorry for what she did. They denied her parole again. In January 2011, Mary Beth had her third parole hearing. At this hearing, she spoke more directly about the crime. She said, "After the deaths of my other children, I just lost it. I became a damaged, worthless piece of person, and when my daughter was young, in my state of mind at that time, I just believed that she was going to die also. So I just did it." This was the most detailed explanation she had ever given. At this hearing, she had people supporting her. Some were from Georgetown University Law Center, and others were people who had worked with her in prison. They spoke to the board and described her as a wonderful person, but the board still focused on her lack of remorse. They said she was not taking full responsibility. They denied her parole for the third time. In February 2013, Mary Beth appeared before the parole board for the fourth time. When they asked her about Tammy Lynn's murder, she gave a different answer. She said, "It's just, I can't remember. I mean, I know I did it, but I can't tell you why. There is no reason." The parole board was not satisfied with this. They wrote in their decision, "This was an innocent, vulnerable victim who was entrusted in your care as her mother, and you viciously violated that trust, causing a senseless loss of this young life." They said that releasing her would make people lose respect for the law. They denied her parole again. In February 2015, Mary Beth had her fifth parole hearing. The board looked at her case again. They noted that she still did not seem to understand the harm she had caused. They found that she continued to demonstrate no real understanding or remorse for taking her child's life. They denied her parole for the fifth time. In January 2017, Mary Beth went before the board for the sixth time. She was now 74 years old. She had spent 3 decades in prison, but the board members looked at the severity of her crime. They looked at the fact that she had killed her own baby, a helpless 4-month-old infant. They decided that even after all these years, she needed to stay in prison. They denied her parole for the 6th time. 1 year later, in 2018, Mary Beth became eligible for parole again. This was her 7th hearing. The parole board looked at her case one more time. They considered that she was now 76 years old. They considered that she had served 31 years in prison, which was 11 years more than the minimum sentence of 20 years. They considered that she had been a model prisoner and had supporters who believed in her. This time, the board made a different decision. They voted to grant her parole. They decided that she could be released from prison and return to the community. On August 21st, 2018, Mary Beth Tinning walked out of Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. She was 76 years old. Her husband Joseph, who had supported her throughout all the years of her imprisonment, was there waiting for her. He was present when she was released. After 31 years behind bars, she was a free woman. But her freedom came with conditions. The parole board did not just let her go without rules. They ordered that she must remain under parole supervision for the rest of her life. This means that for as long as she lives, she has to check in with parole officers and follow their rules. She was required to live in Schenectady County, the same area where the crimes happened. She was given a curfew, which means she has to be home by a certain time each night. She was also ordered to attend domestic violence counseling. These conditions were put in place to monitor her and to try to make sure she would not cause any harm to anyone ever again. After her release, a spokesperson for the Department of Corrections confirmed that Mary Beth was living in Schenectady County. She was back in the same community where she had lived as a young mother, where she had buried 9 children, and where she had finally been arrested and convicted of murder. She was now an elderly woman, trying to live out the rest of her life under supervision, with the memory of what she had done following her forever. Mary Beth Tinning, who killed her daughter Tammy Lynn and confessed to killing 2 other children, was released from prison after 31 years and returned to the community where the crimes took place, where she will live under parole supervision for the rest of her life. Story 4. Winetta Ethel Nixon was born on May 13, 1946, in a small, quiet town called Richford in the state of New York. Richford was the kind of place where most people knew each other, and life moved slowly. She was born into a typical family for that time and place, and she grew up in this rural setting. Her early years were spent in the countryside, and this simple environment was all she knew as a young child. As she got older, Winetta went to the local schools. When she reached the 10th grade, she was a student at Newark Valley High School. However, she did not finish her education. Her time in high school came to an end when she made a decision that would change the course of her life. On January 11, 1964, when she was just 17 years old, she dropped out of school to get married. The young man she married was named Tim Hoyt. By leaving school and marrying Tim, she moved directly from being a teenager in her family's home to being a wife, starting her own household. After Winetta and Tim were married, they began their life together as a couple. Like many young couples in the 1960s, they soon started a family. Their first child, a son they named Eric, was born on October 17, 1964. This was only about 9 months after their wedding. For a young mother like Winetta, having a new baby was a major life event. She was now responsible for the care of a newborn infant. The daily tasks of feeding, changing, and soothing a baby became her new routine. But very soon, something terrible happened. On January 26, 1965, when baby Eric was only 3 months old, he died. The death of an infant was a tragic event, but it was not unheard of. Doctors at the time had an explanation for some of these sudden and unexpected deaths. They called it sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. This meant that a baby could die suddenly, and no one could find a clear medical reason why. For Winetta and Tim, this was the explanation they were given. Their baby boy had died, and it was put down to this mysterious syndrome. They had to grieve and try to move forward with their lives. After some time, Winetta and Tim decided to have another child. On May 31, 1966, they had a second son, whom they named James. They likely hoped for a normal, healthy life with this new baby. For over 2 years, James lived and grew. He passed the age that Eric had been when he died. To his parents, he must have seemed like he was going to be fine. But then, on September 26, 1968, James died. He was 28 months old. Once again, the death was sudden and unexpected. And once again, the cause was given as SIDS. For a family to lose one baby to SIDS was a tragedy. To lose a second child was almost unimaginable. People felt deeply sorry for them. In the middle of this terrible time, Winetta had given birth to another child. On July 19, 1968, just a few months before James died, a baby girl named Julie was born. The family now had a new infant to care for, even as they were dealing with the recent loss of Eric years before and the impending loss of James. The situation in the Hoyt household was a mix of a new baby and a very sick or dying toddler. Julie, however, did not live long either. On September 5, 1968, just a few weeks before James died, baby Julie passed away. She was only about 7 weeks old. Her death, like her brother's, was attributed to SIDS. Within a short period, Juanetta and Tim had lost 2 more children. They now had 3 dead children, and the official explanation for each one was the same mysterious syndrome. Despite the overwhelming grief and the pattern of deaths, life continued. Juanetta became pregnant again. On March 18, 1970, she gave birth to another daughter named Molly. Molly was a baby who became part of a special medical study. A doctor named Alfred Steinschneider was doing research on SIDS. He believed there might be a link between the way babies stopped breathing while they slept, a condition called sleep apnea, and SIDS. Because the Hoyts had already lost 3 children to SIDS, they were a family that interested Dr. Steinschneider. He began to study baby Molly, monitoring her breathing and her sleep patterns. For a few months, they watched her closely. But on June 5, 1970, when Molly was less than 3 months old, she too died. Her death was also ruled as SIDS. She became a part of Dr. Steinschneider's research, a case study in his growing work. Juanetta and Tim had another son on May 9, 1971. They named him Noah. Just like his sister Molly before him, Noah was also made a part of Dr. Steinschneider's research study. The doctor monitored the baby closely, looking for any signs of breathing problems that might lead to SIDS. The doctors and researchers were paying very close attention to this family, trying to find a medical answer for why their babies kept dying. But despite all the medical attention and monitoring, the pattern repeated. On July 28, 1971, Noah died. He was only 11 weeks old. This was the 5th biological child of Juanetta and Tim Hoyt to die. Every single one of their natural children had now passed away, all before reaching the age of 2.5, and all with the same official cause, sudden infant death syndrome. In August of 1971, not long after Noah died, the Hoyts did something new. They temporarily took a baby boy named Scott into their home as a foster child, with the plan of possibly adopting him. They wanted to bring a child into their family. However, this situation was different. Around this time, Juanetta spoke to a psychiatrist. During this conversation, she told the doctor something very important. She said that she was afraid she might harm the baby, Scott. Because she said this, the authorities were notified. They decided it was not safe for Scott to remain in the Hoyt home. He was taken away from her care to protect him. Even after this happened, the idea that Juanetta had harmed her own children was not considered. For years, people believed that Juanetta and Tim were a tragic couple who had been struck by an unbelievable string of bad luck. The medical community, including Dr. Steinschneider, used the deaths of Molly and Noah in his research. In 1972, he published a scientific article that suggested a real connection between sleep apnea and SIDS, using the Hoyt babies as key examples. The family's tragedy became a part of medical history, and no one suspected anything else. Many years passed. In 1977, long after their 5 biological children had died, the Hoyts adopted another child. This was a permanent adoption. They named him Jay. Juanetta raised Jay as her son. To the outside world, she was now a mother to one healthy boy. The terrible deaths of her first 5 children were something that had happened in the distant past. People in the community likely saw her as a woman who had suffered great losses, but had finally been able to raise a child. She went about her daily life as a wife and mother in Richford, and the memories of Eric, James, Julie, Molly, and Noah faded into the background, accepted as a tragic medical mystery. For more than 20 years after Noah died in 1971, Winetta Hoyt lived her life as a mother to her adopted son Jay and as a wife in the small town of Richford. The deaths of her 5 biological children were a closed chapter, officially recorded as tragic cases of sudden infant death syndrome. No one in her daily life, no friends or neighbors, had any reason to think differently. But the truth of what happened to those 5 babies was something only Winetta herself knew. The reality of each death followed a similar pattern. It would begin with a baby crying. Winetta would be at home with the child, and the infant would be fussy or upset. The crying would go on, and she would find herself unable to stop it. The sound of the crying would build up inside her, and she would feel overwhelmed by it. In those moments, she did not call for help or take the baby to a doctor. Instead, she used a simple and direct method to make the crying stop. With Eric, her firstborn, it happened on a day in January 1965. The baby was only a few months old. He was crying, and she could not soothe him. She pressed a pillow or perhaps just her hand over his tiny face. She blocked his nose and his mouth so he could not breathe. The crying stopped. The baby stopped moving. When he was silent and still, she removed the pillow. Then she waited, and then she raised the alarm that her baby had stopped breathing. Later, at the hospital or with the doctors, no one saw any signs of violence. They saw a dead infant with no explanation, so they called it SIDS. Her action led directly to the death, and the lack of any visible evidence led directly to the misdiagnosis. With James, the pattern was the same, but stretched over a longer time. He lived for over 2 years. During that time, he was a toddler, not just a tiny baby. But on that day in September 1968, something happened. Perhaps he was crying or throwing a tantrum. Winetta again used suffocation to stop him. She pressed something over his face, blocking his airway until his struggling stopped and he died. Because he was older, one might think it would be harder to explain. But still, no external injuries were found, and the death was again ruled as SIDS. The doctors likely thought that SIDS could happen to children a bit older, though it was rare. Baby Julie died in between the deaths of her brothers. She was only a few weeks old in September 1968. A newborn baby cries a great deal. Winetta was at home with the infant, perhaps tired or stressed from having 2 other young children, one of whom was very sick and would die soon. Julie began to cry. Winetta could not handle the crying. She used her hand or a soft object to cover the baby's face. She held it there until the baby stopped breathing and died. Once again, the death looked like a sudden, unexplained infant death to the doctors. They had no reason to suspect anything else, especially coming from a mother who had already lost 2 other children mysteriously. One action, the suffocation, led to the baby's death. That death, in a family with a history of SIDS, led the doctors to simply add it to the list. Molly was born in March 1970. Because the family was now part of Dr. Steinschneider's research study, she was watched more closely than the others. There were monitors and observations. But medical equipment could not stop what Winetta would do. On a day in June 1970, when Molly was about 2.5 months old, she was crying. Winetta was alone with her. The crying bothered her, just as it had with the others. Despite the doctor's interest in the study, she performed the same act. She suffocated her daughter. The monitors likely showed that the baby had simply stopped breathing. To the researchers, this was data that supported their theory about sleep apnea. They did not see a mother committing murder. They saw a baby who had suffered an apnea event and died, just as they were studying. Winetta's action of suffocation was hidden behind the medical equipment meant to study the baby. Noah was born in May 1971, and he too was placed in the research study. The doctors were watching, hoping to find answers. Winetta was watching too, but for different reasons. In late July 1971, Noah was crying. He was in his home, under the observation of his mother. She could not bear the crying. She used a method to cover his face and cut off his air. He struggled and then stopped. He died at only 11 weeks old. The researchers recorded another Sid's death. They did not realize that the cause was not in the baby's body, but in the actions of the mother standing over him. Every time a doctor or researcher noted another tragic death in this unfortunate family, they were recording the result of Juaneta's direct actions. The only time the pattern was broken was with the foster child, Scott. In August 1971, shortly after Noah died, Scott came to live with them. He was a baby who cried, just like the others. Juaneta felt the same feelings rising inside her. The urge to stop the crying by any means was very strong. But this time, instead of acting on it, she told someone. She went to her psychiatrist and said she was afraid she might harm the baby. This was a moment where her inner thoughts almost became public. By speaking up, she led the authorities to take action. They removed Scott from the home. If she had not said anything, Scott might have died too, and his death would have been another Sid's case. Her confession of fear was the only time her internal struggle became visible. But even then, no one connected it to the 5 dead children. They simply protected the baby in front of them and did not look backward. After Scott was taken away, Juaneta never again had a biological child. She raised Jay, the boy they adopted in 1977, without incident. He grew up healthy. For years, she lived with the secret. She went to the grocery store, talked to neighbors, and attended community events. No one suspected that the friendly woman in their midst had suffocated her 5 babies. The medical community continued to cite Dr. Steinschneider's research, which used Molly and Noah as examples. The idea that a mother could kill her own children in this way, over and over, and get away with it for so long, seemed impossible. But Juaneta knew the truth, and she carried it with her every day for over 2 decades, as she watched her adopted son grow, and as she grew older herself in the quiet town of Richford. For years after the deaths of her 5 children, Juaneta Hoyt lived quietly in Richford, raising her adopted son Jay. The world outside her small town had no idea about what she had done. But far away from Richford, in a different part of New York State, there was a prosecutor who would eventually uncover the truth. This prosecutor, whose name was Bill Fitzpatrick, was working in a neighboring county on a different type of case in 1985. He was dealing with a murder case where a child had died, and at first, people thought it might be Sid's. But as he looked into it, he realized it was actually a murder. During his work on that case, Bill Fitzpatrick spoke to an expert witness, a forensic pathologist from Dallas, Texas, named Dr. Linda Norton. Dr. Norton was helping him understand the medical details of the child's death. During their conversations, Dr. Norton told the prosecutor something that stuck in his mind. She said that based on some old medical reports she had reviewed, she believed there might be a serial killer operating in his area of New York State. She did not have a name, but she had read a study by Dr. Steinschneider about a family who had lost multiple children to SIDS. The pattern in that study, the way the babies died, looked to her like murder, not natural causes. The report she read did not name the family, so she did not know who they were. But she gave the prosecutor enough information to make him curious. Bill Fitzpatrick did not forget what Dr. Norton told him. Years passed, and he continued his work as a lawyer. In 1992, he was elected to be the district attorney, which is the main prosecutor for his county. Now that he had more authority and resources, he decided to follow up on the old information from Dr. Norton. He wanted to find the family from the medical study. He tracked down the old reports and the research papers written by Dr. Steinschneider. He read about the Hoyt family, though they were still not named directly in the public research. But he was able to figure out who they were and where they lived. He discovered that the family was from Richford, which was not in his county. It was in a different jurisdiction. Once he knew the names and the location, he sent all the medical records and information he had gathered to another expert for a fresh opinion. This expert was a well-known forensic pathologist named Dr. Michael Baden. Dr. Baden looked carefully at the details of each child's death. He studied the ages, the timelines, and the medical reports from Dr. Steinschneider's research. After reviewing everything, Dr. Baden came to a clear conclusion. He stated that these deaths were not from SIDS. In his professional opinion, they were homicides. They were murders. This was the first official medical opinion that directly contradicted the old SIDS rulings. Now there was a problem. The crimes had happened in Richford, which was in a different county than the one where Bill Fitzpatrick was the district attorney. He did not have the legal power to investigate or arrest someone in another county. So in 1994, because of these legal boundaries, the case information was transferred to the district attorney who had authority over Tioga County, where Richford was located. His name was James Hayden. Now the investigation could officially begin in the right place. The authorities in Tioga County had to be careful. They had no physical evidence after all these years. The bodies had been buried for a long time. They had only the word of expert doctors who said the old SIDS rulings were wrong. They needed to get a confession, or they might not have a strong case. So they made a plan to talk to Winetta Hoyt in a way that would not scare her or make her immediately ask for a lawyer. In March of 1994, a New York State trooper named Charles Valentine approached Winetta Hoyt. He knew her because he was from the same small community. He saw her one day at the local post office in Richford. He walked up to her and started a friendly conversation. During this talk, he mentioned that he was doing some personal research on sudden infant death syndrome. He asked if she would be willing to help him with his research, since she had sadly lost 5 children to SIDS. Winetta agreed. She likely thought she was just talking to a friendly trooper about her tragic past. She agreed to go with him to the state police barracks in Ithaca for a more formal conversation. She went there willingly, not knowing she was about to be questioned as a suspect. When she arrived at the police station on March 2nd, 1994, she was taken into a room. Present were Trooper Valentine and 2 other policemen. At first, they talked generally about SIDS, but then the questioning changed. They began to tell her that doctors now believed her children did not die from SIDS. They told her that modern medical experts had reviewed the cases and concluded the babies were murdered. They suggested that she must have done something to them. The interrogation went on for hours. The police used different tactics. They were firm but not physically aggressive. They told her they understood she might have been under stress. They suggested that maybe she just wanted to stop the babies from crying. They presented the idea that it was not something she planned, but something that happened in a moment of frustration. They told her that if she confessed, they would help her get psychiatric treatment. They built a picture of a woman who was overwhelmed, not a cold-blooded killer. This was a psychological approach designed to get her to admit what she had done. Finally, after hours of questioning, Winetta Hoyt confessed. She told them that she had killed all 5 of her children. She explained how she did it. She said she used a pillow or her hand to cover their faces and suffocate them. She gave a reason for her actions. She said the babies were crying, and she wanted to silence them. The crying upset her, and she could not handle it, so she made them stop. That was her explanation for each death. After she gave her confession, she was formally arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder. After her arrest, Winetta was put in jail to wait for her trial. But later, she changed her story. She recanted her confession, which means she said it was not true. She said she only confessed because the police pressured her and she was confused and scared. Her lawyers argued that the confession should not be used in court because it was not given freely and knowingly. This became the central issue of the trial, which began in April 1995. During the trial, both sides brought in expert psychiatrists to talk about Winetta's state of mind during the interrogation. The defense hired a psychiatrist named Dr. Charles Patrick Ewing. He evaluated Juanetta and diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder and avoidant personality disorder. These are conditions that make a person easily led by others and very eager to please people in authority. Dr. Ewing testified in court that because of her personality disorders, she was especially vulnerable to the police tactics. He said that when the troopers suggested things to her, she went along with them to gain their approval and escape the stressful situation. He gave his professional opinion that her confession was not made knowingly and not made voluntarily. He argued it was not reliable. The prosecution also hired a psychiatrist, Dr. David Barry, to examine Juanetta and evaluate the confession. Dr. Barry agreed with the defense on one point. He testified that yes, Juanetta Hoyt had likely been manipulated by the police during the interrogation. He acknowledged that the officers used psychological pressure. However, he did not say the confession was false. He simply noted that the tactics used were effective in getting her to talk. The fact that she was manipulated did not mean, in his view, that what she said was untrue. The jury had to decide whether to believe the confession or to believe that it was forced out of her. The jury listened to all the evidence. They heard about the 5 dead children. They heard about Dr. Bodden's opinion that the deaths were murders. They heard the psychiatrists argue about the confession. They heard the tape of Juanetta describing how she suffocated her babies. In the end, the jury believed that the confession was true. They concluded that she had indeed killed her children. In April 1995, they found Juanetta Hoyt guilty on all 5 counts of murder. Several months later, on September 11, 1995, she stood before a judge to learn her punishment. The judge sentenced her to a long prison term. For each of the 5 murders, she was given 15 years in prison. The judge ordered that these sentences be served one after another, not at the same time. This meant she would serve 15 years for Eric, then another 15 years for James, then another 15 years for Julie, and so on. In total, her sentence was 75 years to life in prison. This meant she would have to spend at least 75 years behind bars, which for a woman her age was essentially the rest of her life. After the trial, people who studied the case began to speculate about what kind of mental condition could cause a mother to kill her own children in this way. Some experts suggested that she might have suffered from a condition called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. This is a rare and controversial diagnosis where a person, often a mother, harms her child to get attention and sympathy from doctors and others. In Juanetta's case, each death brought her sympathy and attention from the community and the medical researchers. But this was only speculation after her conviction. It was not something that was proved in court. Juanetta Hoyt did not spend many years in prison. After her trial, she was sent to a state prison to serve her sentence. But she was already sick. She had a disease that she did not know about before her arrest. She had pancreatic cancer. This is a very serious and fast-moving type of cancer. As her health got worse, she was moved to a prison hospital so she could receive medical care. Despite the treatment, the cancer continued to spread through her body. On August 13, 1998, for years after her arrest and 3 years after her sentencing, Juanetta Hoyt died in prison. Because she died before her lawyers could finish the appeals process, something unusual happened under New York state law. When a person dies while their case is still on appeal, the conviction is often set aside. The legal principle is that a person has the right to appeal, and if they die before that process is complete, the case cannot continue. So technically, Juanetta Ethel Hoyt was formally exonerated after her death. In the eyes of the law, her convictions were erased. But the facts of what she did, based on her confession and the evidence at trial, remained part of the public record. After her death, her body was brought back to the place where she was born. She was buried in Highland Cemetery in Richford, New York, the same small town where she had lived most of her life and where she had killed her 5 children in the privacy of her own home.